Talking baseball, baseball and the Orioles.
Welcome back to the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Benny Becker, and I couldn't be any more excited to bring you guys this episode today. Got some great stuff to talk about. First, we're going to catch you up on the last 3/4 spring training games. We'll kind of explain that. Maybe you already understand what I mean by that. Get you up to date on Kyle Bradish and his injury. Some big news there. Most recent cuts from the camp. Some AL East news that I think is just prevalent to the Orioles season ahead. How to make room for Coby Mayo is a topic I want to touch on later. And then I think we're going to end with a breakdown of the schedule if we have time. I did some analysis on the schedule at hand. I already knew that we had maybe an easy start, an easy path to begin the season. And I want to touch on not only that, but really every part of the schedule. I'm very excited to break that down and really show you guys why it's almost a guarantee that the Orioles will be in the playoffs and truly be in a divisional race, if nothing more, if not running away with the division this season. And I'm fully confident when I say all of those things, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. First, it's episode 8, the Cal Ripken of episodes, guys. And I had an awesome Cal Ripken shirt that I wanted to wear, and somewhere it got lost in the weeds in my craziness of my bedroom. I don't know if it's in a drawer with the 300 shirts I have. I don't know if it's in a laundry basket. I know I didn't lose it. I know it's not lost. I just don't know quite where it is because it's not hanging in the closet where it should be. A little upset by that, but listen, show must go on. The show must go on, gang. And I'm very excited that we've gotten to this point, episode 8, and I'm excited to see where the future brings us. So let's just dig right in. Game 19 of spring training. 12-8 win against the Rays. A lot of good stuff. Again, we're not going to dig too much into any one of these games, but I want to highlight some things that are very encouraging. And when you win 12-8, there's a lot of encouraging stuff. In our last episode, we touched on how this game was going, and it was looking really good. I want to say the Orioles were up 7-0 at one point early. Obviously, it got a little closer later, 12-8, but you see a lot of encouraging signs from these guys. Gunnar Henderson, 2 for 4 with a double. Colton Cowser, 2 for 3. Ryan O'Hearn, 2 for 3. Mountcastle, 1 for 4, 2 RBIs, double. You gotta love it, especially seeing those two first basemen really start heating up and meshing and getting their timing back. Beautiful thing to see. It's special what that combination at first base can do for us this season. We saw what they did last season, and that was with Mountcastle multiple times dealing injury, one of which was vertigo that really kept him out for at least a month, if not 2. And when he came back, it was tough for him to regain some of that. Hopefully the man doesn't get vertigo this time around. Also, big days, Adley Rutschman, 3 for 4 with 2 RBIs, was his second straight multi-hit game, which was great to see because we know Adley has struggled a little at the dish early on. And again, no panic button being pressed there. Full confidence, Adley Rutschman will be perfectly fine this season. In fact, not only perfectly fine, but thriving this season. Fully believe that. We've talked multiple times about these 2 reserve infielders. Jorge Mateo, 1 for 3, continues to stay hot. Urias also 1 for 3, but he had a home run. Gotta love seeing those 2. And frankly, there's a name or two we've talked previously about that could make this roster as a reserve infielder if it wasn't for both of them having such great springs. And truly they have. They've taken on this reserve role, they've taken on this utility role, and really come into camp wheels churning. And very excited to see the outcome and the output that they've consistently brought us all spring training. Probably the biggest day at the dish, or almost definitely the biggest day at the dish. Jordan Westburg, 2 for 3, 3 RBIs, a double, a home run. Phenomenal to see him start performing better at the plate also. He's a person that expressed a lot of frustration earlier this camp about kind of his slow start at the dish. And I don't think anybody in the Orioles organization worried about him. I personally didn't worry about him. you just know he's such a competitor, and a lot of guys around him were hitting. And frankly, he knows there's a big competition for roster spots at every level, but definitely infield. We talked, there's a couple infielders making pushes for the team, but there's just no spot for them. Westburg was always going to be on this roster. Opening day. Like, I don't think Jordan Westburg isn't going to be on the Orioles major league roster at any point this season. That he's going to be up there all season. I don't think there's a point he's not on that. So I'm very excited and encouraged to see that he's finally started to get it going. Again, we talked like Santander. Sometimes it's just small adjustments. I haven't seen any report about maybe a change in stance or anything like that, but you know there are tweaks being made constantly, and at the same time, you just have to trust the process, understand that this is a top prospect, elite, talented individual, even if he gets overlooked in this crazy talent pool that the Orioles have. Jordan Westburg is a serious major league player and going to be a big cog for this Orioles team throughout the way. Should be starting third base for us consistently throughout the entire season. On the pitching side, Tyler Wells, 4 innings pitched, 2 hits, 1 walk, 1 K, 1 earned, a 1.5 ERA so far this spring. You know how high I am on Tyler Wells for being an X factor wherever he's pitching for these Orioles, whether it's starting, relieving, or closing. But we also talked about how he wants to be a starter, and he's trained his body and mind to be that starter. And so far, he's showing what he did at last season. In the beginning of last season, don't forget how great of a 2 months he had as a starting pitcher last year, before the wheels kind of started shaking and falling off. Again, he put in the work. He put in the effort. Hopefully, the wheels don't fall off. Either way, he looks primed to come back and have a great start to this season as a starter. And then we can see how it shakes out. We can see where it goes from there. Also, some good guys out of the bullpen. You had Yennier Cano, 2 Ks in a perfect inning. Cionel Perez allowed 3 runners, but no runs. You know, I mean, if that's not Cionel Perez 101, I don't know what is. And he's had a shaky spring so far at times and has looked good at times. And again, very Cionel Perez. Hopefully, though, he can show us what he has the last 2 seasons once the regular season comes. And I kind of trust him now, at least to give me a consistently solid, above average lefty in the middle of my bullpen. At a certain point, I'm not looking for elite everywhere, guys. We've talked about this before. In Major League Baseball, in order to be a World Series type team, you need the middle guys to just be average to above average. There's space on Major League rosters for average to above average. And it's okay if consistency isn't always best with those guys. It's okay, as long as you're getting a lot more good than you are bad. And I think we'll see that. Brian Baker, 1 unearned run in his inning. Another guy pushing for that last wild card spot. He was a guy coming into camp, maybe I gave an 80% chance to be on this bullpen. Now I'm thinking it's probably down to 60, but still that means he's most likely going to find his way on this Orioles roster. To me, I like Baker. Again, a guy that has shown us good things in the past. So then we move on to the next game, Game 20. It was a 7-5 loss against the Braves. Not a ton to talk about, offensively especially. When you look at the box score, really you wonder almost how they got the 5 runs. No multi-hit games by anybody, so we're not really going to touch much on that. You look at Cole Irvin and his day, and it's not what you want to see. 3 2/3, gave up 7 hits, 6 earned, 4 walks, so 11 base runners, 3 Ks, 2 home runs. Listen, not the day for Cole Irvin. If I remember correctly, the Braves hit lefties really well, so not the craziest thing. Not wild, and certainly not a panic button, but listen, Cole Irvin's one of those guys that we just talked about, fits right into, if you can be average to above average, you do a lot for me. So while I believe with him coming into better shape and maybe focusing a little more on the effort behind everything, I think he could have a real surprisingly nice run for us this season, especially in that first half. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it goes off the rails. It could. Cole Irvin is a prime candidate, if anybody is, for these Orioles, for things to get off the rails and get shaky. But again, I'm rooting for him. I'm hoping for him. And I'm optimistic for him. We've talked about how Cole Irvin's one of those mystery men that could wind up in the Cy Young conversation, at least in the first half of the year, if he comes out and takes that next level. We'll see what happens with him. You never know till the season gets here. Danny Colomb, nice 1 2 third inning pitched, only gave up a walk. Other than that, it was perfect. And Keegan Aiken, yet another name, another lefty we talked about. 1 1/3 perfect innings with 3 Ks. Continues his strong spring. And that's a guy that you saw break camp with them last year with a strong spring. And it went off the rails very quick. And then he dealt with injury and he never really came back to Baltimore last season. But is another guy that was sort of a top prospect for them before they gained all of this talent in the pool. So his talent didn't go anywhere. He's still a very talented pitcher and shows he can perform. So hopefully he can be a nice lefty bullpen piece for us. And in those 3 guys, Keegan Aiken, Danny Colomb, and Cionel Perez, we have 3 strong lefties in the pen. I'd love to see it. So then we go to Game 21, a 5-2 win over the Pirates. I'm not going to go crazy on it. Offensively, again, there wasn't a ton to jump out of your seat for. Kyle Stowers continued to have a hot spring with a 3-run home run. It was his only hit of the day. But still, he stays hot and making a push for that outfield reserve spot. I'm not sure at this point if he's really going to get it. Because I think, again, Ryan McKenna is probably going to have a roster spot. And the way Colin Cowser is hit allows the Orioles to maybe add that second outfield reserve spot with Colin Cowser. I think that's where they're going to go. But Kyle Stowers will absolutely be up for this major league club. And I hope he continues to thrive and make the logjam situation for the Orioles a more difficult one. Because when it's more difficult, that means that everyone's performing. And it's difficult because you don't know how you're going to get this guy up because everybody else is performing up to what you need them to. And that's what happens with great teams. On the pitching end, Gray Rod, 4 1/3, 4 hits, 2 walks, so some base runners, 2 Ks, 2 earned. Okay with that day. Again, the 2 Ks worries me. This is something we've talked about the last couple Gray Rod starts, about how the strikeouts don't seem to be there. I'm hoping that they're still keeping this plan of, hey, we don't need you to throw 101, 102 in spring. We want you to focus on control. We want you to focus on mechanics. We want you to focus on the off-speed and breaking stuff. So I'm hoping that that's just kind of why we see that. But even without the strikeouts, Gray Rod continues to put up very solid numbers, consistently solid numbers. I think that line, that stat line, is almost an identical copy of his last 2 stat lines. Truly. If I went back and looked at it, I feel like they are almost identical. So he's having a very consistent spring, and I love Gray Rod. You know I love Gray Rod to make a push for that Cy Young. And I kind of had a revelation yesterday on it. I don't want to dig too much into it because then I'm getting off topic. But essentially, I think Gray Rod will have a Cy Young type season with about a month where it goes a little haywire. I could see somewhere in that middle summer, June, July, August sort of thing. The dog days of summer get to him. And for like a month, for about 4 or 5 starts, it gets a little wild and not pretty. And I think part of that also is when you look at the schedule, how the schedule shakes out. And we will get to that because that is something I need to talk about. But I think ultimately, if he has that rocky month or so, that's going to prevent him from truly being at the top of the Cy Young and making a push to win it, which is fine. Corbin Burnes can make the push to win it. Nobody's going to complain then. And then we essentially have two Cy Youngs, and one of which had a rocky month, but rebounded and came back like a Cy Young again. And I think that's what's going to happen. Basically, a condensed version of Grayson Rodriguez's season last year. Whereas, not as extreme, where it's to the point they need to send him down to the minors. And it's so bad in that one inning. No, I think it's just going to have some bad innings in that stretch of season that might get tough for him. And just like he worked it out in the minors last year, I think he'll be able to work it out in the majors this year. And I think we have a talented enough team to even be able to win ball games that are somewhat getting away from him. Again, last season it felt like he was giving up 6 to 8 runs in his bad inning. And yet we would come back in those and lose by only a couple. So last year I was saying this, if your bad inning only winds up being 4 or 5, we're still right in it, man. Just because you're down 5-0 in the second doesn't mean you're not out of it, especially with the roster the Orioles have. So I really love Gray Rod this season moving forward. I have sky-high expectations for the kid. But I'm also thinking I'm realistic that it could have that tough month or so, and he works it out while remaining in the majors at least a average starting pitcher. Then you see Craig Kimbrell, another scoreless inning. Very good to see. Yeah, it's important to see because, again, he struggled early in camp. We've talked about that. And we talked about how it's very realistic that he could wind up losing this job at some point. I didn't think even with a tough spring he'd lose the job. But he can sense the guys on his heels. He sees the talent around him every day. And there's a whole heck of a lot of it. So you need to perform, and he seems like he's mentally getting in it. And just like Corbin Burnes, he's going to a new situation, a new place. Now, unlike Corbin Burnes, he was with the Phillies last year. Clearwater's very close to Sarasota, very similar places. In fact, depending on his situation, he could basically have next to nothing change. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Kimbrell. I'm still optimistic and will absolutely have money on him to lead the league in saves this season. Not screaming that it's going to happen. One of my lower quality plays possibly, but still great value on it. And in the gambling episode, we can get into all of that, gang. Now, remember I said they had 3/4 games. That's because we had that spring breakout game. Now, I do want to correct myself from last episode. I said that not every team is having one of these spring breakout games. That's incorrect. Apparently, every team's doing it. I figured out after that. But neither here or there. We already had our game, so I kind of don't care as much about the spring breakout stuff. And it was cool to watch, even though, as an Orioles fan, it was somewhat painful. Frankly, it was just a boring baseball game in general. 3-1, I think they lost to the Pirates also. But the one thing I really want to bring up, listen, the Orioles got one hit. It wasn't pretty. One hit. Somehow we got one run on a sac fly by Judd Fabian, the Florida product, another one of our talented outfielders in the minors. But talk about talented outfielders. The one hit was an Enrique Bradfield bunt. Well, again, not promising, not great, but his home to first time was something I wanted to highlight real quick because if you compare it to every home to first time for the Orioles last season, it would have been the fastest. Now, we've talked about his 80 grade speed, truly one of the fastest prospects out there, one of the fastest players at any level of baseball right now. So it's great to see. Hopefully, the Vanderbilt product, the first round pick, can kind of figure out how to hit and not have to rely on those bunt singles where major leaguers might get you out when minor leaguers won't. Hopefully, his bat can develop. But if not, listen, it's not what you want in a first-round pick, but there's room on an MLB team for a very fast defensive outfielder. Guy that can play all three outfield positions. You can put into pinch run at any time. Is he a liability at the bat? I don't know if Bradfield is, but ultimately there have been a lot of guys that are liabilities at the bat. But hopefully he can figure it out swinging the bat too. Either way, kept us out of being no hit in that game, which thankfully. And you see one of the many reasons why people are so high on him with that 80 grade speed. All right, so that ends game-wise, okay? Again, we just want to sprinkle on those. Oh, another guy in that game 21, the Major League game, not the spring breakout game, that, again, I don't want to get deep into, but a name I don't think I've mentioned really yet, Tyler Nevin, is really doing everything he can to get himself this roster spot. And he's one of those guys that, infield-wise, if Urias or Mayo wasn't performing nearly as well, would have a shot at making this roster. If the Cowsers and the Stowers and McKenna's weren't playing well, they might go one. He might have a better path. I just don't see the path for Tyler Nevin. I don't. So that's why I really haven't talked much about him, despite the fact that every time I see his name in the lineup, he continues to perform. So I just wanted to drop it in there, mention it real quick. But ultimately, I don't think he makes his Major League roster out of camp. I'm pretty sure then he would have to be designated for assignment. And I think he's shown that he's good enough to find himself on some roster this season. Might have to go out to Oakland or Kansas City or somewhere like that, Florida. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Tyler Nevin, because he's performed well enough to make this roster, but unfortunately, can only carry so many guys. There aren't unlimited spots on this, guys. All right, so next is one of the most important storylines in spring training for the Orioles, and we're getting very optimistic and encouraging signs from it. So it's Kyle Bradish and his elbow injury. We know the first day of camp, they came out and said he had a partially torn UCL, which screams Tommy John, but they were always optimistic. Like everything you heard from Brandon Hyde, everything you heard from Mike Elias, everything that they were talking about was optimistic, was saying that we're confident we're going to have him this season. It just won't be right away. And when you hear that, you're like, I love hearing it, but I'll believe it when I see it. And we knew he started a throwing program shortly after, literally like the third day of camp, which was another encouraging sign, because you don't have that happen if you think the guy's elbow injury is truly a problem. And everything was encouraging after that. And that was flat ground, just small toss. Well, we've had another update, and the other day he had a bullpen session off the mound. It was only 20 pitches, all fastballs. But we're hearing great things. Apparently he felt good and was looking well. That's all you can ask for, guys. And frankly, we're at least a day or two out from that. So it's very, very, very encouraging, unbelievably encouraging, that we haven't heard anything negative yet. That he's not in pain, that they're not sending him for another MRI, that they don't need to do more stuff because they feel confident where he's at. And it seems very much like he's absolutely going to be able to make this comeback to play this season with this injury. And I love it. I absolutely love hearing it. You got to feel good about that, because getting Kyle Bradish back is just one more reason why this Baltimore Orioles team is going to continue to flourish and make that push for the World Series. I love it. I love it. Next, we got camp cuts. Okay, there were 8 names in total, but only 2 I want to touch on. And they were 2 men that had incredible springs. And again, if some of these guys weren't pitching as well as they were, maybe they could have found their way on this roster on these performances. But I don't think it hurts to keep them in camp. Give them a little more seasoning. Let them work out whatever we need them to work out a little more before they make the majors, okay? And that's Chase McDermott and Cade Povich. We've talked about them highly. They're a top 2 prize pitching prospects. In last episode, when I talked about their recent performances, I said they're probably towards the end of their camp. At best, they had one, maybe two outings left. Well, I don't even think either of them got in the game after that. But to just highlight what they did this spring and tell you kind of the talent that they have. Overall, McDermott had 6 2/3 scoreless innings and 10 Ks. Povich had 7 innings, 9 Ks, 2 runs, only one of them was earned. So, I mean, that's unbelievable stuff. You can just envision that stat line, those two stat lines, in back-to-back games in the Orioles rotation in the future. One game, McDermott goes 6 2/3 scoreless. Maybe doesn't strike out the 10. Let's bump that down to 8, 7, 8. Okay, and then Povich, 7 innings. Maybe, again, doesn't strike out 9. But let's move that to 7. Okay. So, a strikeout an inning. Only 2 runs, 1 earned. I mean, if that's the reality, that's what we're getting in the future. That shows you the talent level right there, and that allows you to envision just how great this rotation can be moving forward. We know we love Grayson Rodriguez. You add those 2 names behind Grayson Rodriguez and all 3 guys live up to the hype. What if Johnson lives up to the hype? Yeah, like, it's unbelievable the talent that's there. But you love seeing it and you love projecting on it. And that's something for the future. So the next topic I want to hit, and we're kind of running through these because the last 2 topics might take up a little bit of time, right? So we're kind of running through a little quicker when it comes to some of these. And this is another one I'm just going to touch on here and there. But some AL East news. Non-Orioles related, but it is Orioles related because, again, it's things that affect the teams we're competing for, at least in the division, and truly in the whole league, right? So the biggest news out of non-Orioles camp has been Garrett Cole getting hurt. So the Yankees lose their Cy Young candidate, really, for a month or 2. Now, it's similar to what the Orioles had to go through with Bradish to a lesser degree for us, for a greater degree for them, because he has won Cy Youngs. He is an elite pitcher. He is a premier pitcher. And he's the guy that they look to stop the bleeding every time. And let me tell you, for as high as pundits are on these Yankees this season, I believe there's a lot of bleeding that might happen for these Yankees. And losing Cole only increases that for them. Now, they're saying also, just like Bradish, it'll be like a month, maybe 2. We'll see. I think there's a lot more pessimism behind Cole than Bradish. I really do. I think if one's optimistic and one's pessimistic, I think Kyle Bradish is the one that's optimistic and Garrett Cole is the one that's pessimistic, right? So the next bit of news is another arm injury. This one is getting Tommy John surgery or maybe just the ligament reattached or the smaller Tommy John. But Lucas Giolito, who the Red Sox brought in to be possibly their ace, and he's coming off a tough season, maybe even 2. That was a name the Orioles kicked the tires on last season and decided not to go in that direction. And it was probably for the best because when he went to the Angels, that was an embarrassment. And then he bounced to somebody else and it didn't go good. And now clearly Giolito with the Red Sox, either major Tommy John or minor Tommy John, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I'm no expert on that stuff. But he's going to miss most, if not all, of the season. Put it that way. And then talk about names that were linked to the Orioles. I mean, all offseason, especially before we traded for Corbin Burns, the number 1 name that everybody was writing about. It was like an everyday thing. And there wasn't any news to it, but it was an everyday conversation was Dylan sees this and Dylan sees that. The Orioles need to overpay for Dylan Cease. And Dylan Cease is very talented, and I like Dylan Cease a lot. And I would probably be gung-ho Dylan Cease also if he wound up getting traded here. Ultimately, though, he gets traded to San Diego, and that's great because after the Cole injury, there was a lot of turning about, are the Yankees going to sign Snell or Montgomery? And there was a lot of talk of, no, they're out on those two. But then there was the talk of, oh, they're going to talk about Dylan Cease now. And Cease is a name that I didn't want them to get any of them. Hell, I want the Yankees to be as piss poor as possible. But Dylan Cease was certainly a name that I didn't want to see get traded to the Yankees. And ultimately, he gets traded to San Diego. And so that's a great thing for us. Yes, we don't get him, but it's a great thing for us because not only out of the division, potentially, but out of the whole league. Not even in the AL anymore. So you love it. All right. So now here's kind of the two longer points. The first one's going to be how to make room for Coby Mayo. We keep talking about these guys that are playing well enough to make this roster, but yet aren't going to have a roster spot because of how talented everything else is. Well, that's Coby Mayo 101. And sure, maybe the Orioles are pretty gung-ho on making or allowing him to go to the minors and get more at-bats and get more training in the field and really work out a little more kinks here and there. But I think the way he's performing, not just at the bat, but on the field, they're so encouraged by him on the field also at this point that I think they really would love to have him on this roster right now. But again, there's just no space, okay? So if I'm going to assume that these 7 infielders are on the Orioles roster, and these are the only 7 infielders on the Orioles roster on opening day, okay? You have at first base, Mountie and O'Hearn, the duo we talked there. Second, Holiday. Short, Henderson. Third, Westberg. And then the reserves, Urias and Mayo, like we've been screaming all spring training. Then where can you bring up Coby Mayo? And we just talked earlier about how between McKenna and Cowser, both of them are probably going to be on this roster to make 2 outfield reserve spots, which means we're not going to have room for another infield reserve spot. And I don't think Coby Mayo would come up as an 8th infielder with these 7 guys anyway, because I don't see the playing time there. So how do we eventually make room for him? Well, I've kind of figured out 3 ways, right? 3 options that are going to wind up leading his path to the Major League roster. The first, and probably the easiest for the Orioles to mentally get past, early at least, would be trading Ramon Urias. We know he's had a hot spring, and hopefully that hot bat continues when he has his opportunities. But his at-bats are going to be more limited, which, despite the fact that he was very clutch for us last year in maybe limited at-bats, he didn't necessarily have the best numbers in those limited at-bats. It's hard to really gain that rhythm consistently once you get to the season and those at-bats shrink. So if Ramon Urias isn't continuing to hit his way on this roster, if it starts dipping around that 200 number and it starts becoming a liability and those clutch moments disappear, there's only so much that you can value his Gold Glove out there. Because we need offense from those reserve spots when you have the options of offense from those reserve spots, like we have in Coby Mayo. So that's the number 1 candidate. I could say Jorge Mateo is thrown in there as well, but because Mateo plays short and now center, and I think has the ability to kind of expand that to maybe second or corner outfield spot at some point this season. I mean, Mayo is first, third. So really, we can make up the difference at second base. We got guys that can go play second base. Like, obviously, Holiday, Westberg would probably play more second base then. And that's kind of how we would keep all these at-bats moving. So Kobe Mayo playing at third and first makes more sense to replace Ramon Urias than it does Jorge Mateo. Okay? And that's why I didn't add Mateo into that. I still believe the Orioles have this envision of putting Mateo in a pinch run situation in the playoffs when we need that base. And that's what I'm envisioning. And frankly, I think that Mateo has much higher of a ceiling offensively than Urias does. Now, Urias is more consistent, for sure. His floor is higher also. But ultimately, if that ceiling really shrinks and the floor starts even dipping on Urias, I don't think the Orioles are anticipating getting a haul at any point for Ramon Urias. So it's more whenever you need to pull the trigger to improve the roster, you do that, improve the roster by bringing up Mayo, and then who really cares? You can take a chance on an 18, 19-year-old single-A player with some real potential, or potentially even maybe one of these young pitchers that are going through Tommy John that year with another team. Take a gamble on that, similar like we did with Seth Johnson with the Rays a couple years ago, or last year, whatever it was. And now he's our third pitching prospect, or third starting prospect as far as rankings go. So we can make that move, and in a year or two see the fruits of it. You know what I mean? So reap what we sowed, pretty much. But we don't need to bring in a high level prospect, just a guy that we like, that we think will develop into that high level prospect, or a guy waiting out an injury who is a high level prospect that maybe a team now values less because he's going to be out for the next year or so. So that's where I think the easiest path for Kobe Mayo is. And I don't see that happening by opening day. No matter how good Mayo continues to do, I think Ramon Urias is at least breaking camp with these Orioles. And then they're going to give it a couple weeks, a month or two, before maybe they see, okay, time to move on from Urias. We enjoyed it. He was pretty solid for us. He did what we needed him to do. But the time is now for Kobe Mayo. And again, get the Mayo his at-bats consistently at that situation, because obviously he'll be playing third. Westberg can take more reps at second. That means Holiday can take more reps at short. Gunnar could take reps at third. You also have Mayo taking reps at first, sparing Mountie and O'Hearn some days. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of movement for these Orioles, potentially. And so when we see Mayo come up, I think that's how he's mostly going to get his at-bats. And remember, we talked, I believe, last episode about how he's athletic enough and the Orioles like him enough to throw him in a corner outfield spot at some point. So don't be surprised if Kobe Mayo finishes the season with 3 to 5 games in a corner outfield spot. Again, just to get him those at-bats consistently. It's a great thing, this flexibility the Orioles have. It all allows Brandon Hyde to mix and match and make sure every single person is getting the opportunity that not only they deserve, but that's best for us. So then the second path I see is if Mountcastle specifically, but him or O'Hearn, really struggled this season, especially if the two of them struggled this season. That then is a huge path for Kobe Mayo. I don't see it happening. I love those two this year together as a platoon. That's one of those things that, like in a baseball video game, you put in and it's unstoppable for you. That's how good it could be. O'Hearn the lefty, Mountie the righty. You're going to have them both in the lineup some days. O'Hearn can play right field. He can jump in the outfield for us. They're both going to DH at times. Again, the flexibility, the movement. I believe that both of them are going to have maybe not all-star caliber seasons, but very, very nice seasons, splitting time between the two. So I don't see this being the path that ultimately winds up for Kobe Mayo to get to Baltimore. But it's possible. It's certainly a possibility. I know the Orioles would rather keep Kobe at third than first, right now especially. And this time last year, I think they would have been like more open to the idea of Kobe Mayo switching to first base hard this year. But I think he's shown them so much in his fielding ability and his athleticism that I don't think the Orioles want to stunt that growth by shoving him over at first base before it's necessary in his career, at least. But this is a team that's ready to win. This is a team prepared to win. So it's certainly possible that if the duo is struggling immensely, that the Orioles look in that direction and maybe trade one of those guys. Certainly possible. Now, really the third avenue, this season at least, that I see Kobe Mayo making the team before the rosters expand at least. Because Lord knows if he's still in the minors once the rosters expand, assuming that he's healthy and he's had a decent year, he's going to be up in the majors, right? He could even take a regression in his minor league numbers this season and still make the majors at that point, because he might be at the point where it's maybe doing a little more harm than good in the minors. And maybe not yet to start the season, but maybe by halfway through the season. And sometimes that happens, and these guys' numbers start to go down, not because the talent's not there, not because they're not continuing to improve, but ultimately because, well, you need to face better competition to get better sometimes. And he may wind up getting to that spot. So if his numbers take a small hit and he's healthy and he's not up by roster expansion, he'll be up then. Okay, so that's, I guess, one of the four ways. I was saying three. That's, I guess, the fourth. The third way, and again, I don't see this because I really do like this man moving forward. I think this is a key piece to this Orioles core that is very undervalued, very overlooked when it comes to talking this core, but maybe just as set of a member, maybe not as high of a member as some other guys, but just as set of a member in it as everybody else, and that is Jordan Westburg. So if Jordan Westburg winds up getting moved in a blockbuster trade, that's another path for Kobe Mayo. And I'll just use this as an example. We talked about my thought of Mike Trout being traded to the Orioles and how it's not a conversation anywhere but right here, right now. But eventually in this season, if the Angels season goes the way it does and Mike Trout's season goes the way it does and the Orioles season goes the way it does, I think that this could be a very realistic move. And in that situation, while I would hope the Orioles could wind up moving more guys like Bradfield or Judd Fabian and some of the lower great prospects, there's a potential that the Angels or any other team that we're talking to about a blockbuster would require a name like Jordan Westburg. The team knows they're not getting Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holiday. You're not getting those guys, Grayson Rodriguez. Like, they're at the point where now teams can't ask for them because it'll just hang up the phone. Mike Elias would literally go, click. You say that name, click. Not even worth his time, right? So that to me is a possibility, Westburg being the casualty, if you will, of the premier piece of a blockbuster trade, such as for Mike Trout. And I don't think we would need to do that. When I touched on the hypothetical trades I kind of put together for Mike Trout, I talked more about a little more veteran of a major league player, somebody in that outfield, somebody like Santander or Hayes or Mullins, that can be the number one centerpiece around essentially the blockbuster trade. And then you throw in those Bradfields, Fabians, guys like that. And then who knows? You might be able to get it. Connor Norby is a name that could jump in there. And again, Norby's a name, just like Westburg, I think gets completely overlooked and undervalued. So Norby's a name I don't think the Orioles want to see get traded, just like Jordan Westburg's a name they don't want to trade. These are now becoming somewhat of the untouchable pieces. below the names that you just can't ask for because I'll hang up. You can ask for Jordan Westburg, and I'll tell you no. You ask for Adley Rushman, I hang up that phone real quick. So, those are the 3 paths. And I think the most likely is that Ramon Urias, because then if he can't fill offensively the reserve role like you need him to, at that point, it might be worth shipping him somewhere where he can play every day and he can be a nice piece to a team rebuilding just like he was for the Orioles. Give them good, solid defense. Give them consistency. Allow him to get his at-bats back, which should result maybe in his numbers getting back. And again, that's all hypothetical because he's had good numbers this spring. And he had good numbers decent enough last year. So, those are the 3 paths. I think the Urias trade makes the most sense to me moving forward. But I don't see it for at least 3 weeks to 3 months. I don't see it till later on in the year if it does happen. All right. So now we go to the last topic, and I broke down the schedule. As you guys can see, I broke down everything about the schedule. Okay. And I remember, one sec. Oh, I ran out of seltzers today. So that's why the koozie is on the shelf. And we got the Camden Yards 30th anniversary cup as our drinking, our beverage holder, or whatever you want to call it. Very good stuff. I love this cup. A lot of cool stuff on this cup. The only problem to me is the fact that I was at most of the big moments on this cup. I was a part of it, which is great. I mean, I've been a part of everything Orioles, but literally, yeah, like the Delman Young double was on there and stuff. And there's only a handful of things, and it kind of also made me sad a little because I guess that's just how few great moments we've had in the 30 years since Camden Yards has been open, which is a little bit of a bummer. But the good part is I think there are a lot of great moments coming for us. There are a lot of those big moments. There are banners that don't just say the division champs, that say AL champs and World Series champs coming. And there's a lot bigger doubles than Delman Young's coming for this franchise. And, okay, maybe, Cal tying and breaking the record. Yeah, okay. Maybe there's no moment like that, but there's no moment like that in sports ever. Like, that's an all-time moment, an unbreakable record. So, okay. That can be on the cup. Let's replace the Delman Young double and the 2014 AL East champs with some World Series titles and some awesome moments that are to come with this core. All right. Get back to the schedule. Let's dig into the schedule. I teased that I had heard a while back that the Orioles schedule to start was very, very easy. The beginning of their season was extremely easy, and it is. It absolutely is, okay? So there's going to be a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you, so try and stick with me because I'm going to try and simplify it and not be as confusing as possible, which can happen sometimes with these numbers. But in the first 12 series of the season, okay, listen to the teams that we're facing. The first 12 series, the first 36 games of the year, these are the teams we're playing. The Angels, the Royals, the Pirates, the Red Sox, the Brewers, the Twins, the Royals again, the Angels again, the A's, the Yankees, the Reds, and then the Nationals. I mean, if that's not the opposite of Murderer's Row, I almost don't know what is in this baseball. I didn't do the research on looking at all these teams' win totals, but if I did, you'd have some of the lowest potential win totals in Vegas right now in that stretch. The Angels are most likely going to be putrid. We have 6 games against them in those 36 games. The Royals, while I think they could be a little more competitive this season than they were last season, are still not probably going to be very good. Got 6 games against them in the 36. Pittsburgh. Again, another team I think could take steps this season, but odds are more in that back half of the season. Once more prospects come up and they kind of get Skeens and Johnson and all these other prospects that we saw yesterday up, I think that might make it better. 3 against Pittsburgh. Boston, we talked, Giolito's hurt, given he's not everything for them and it's a division rival. But we play Boston tough, and they're not projected to do very well. If anything, I'm also projecting Boston to maybe do better than people expect, simply on the reasoning that Boston seems to be that team every year that if people have high hopes for them, they stink. And if they have no hopes for them, they tend to be decent. So I could see them pushing for a wild card even. But I think it might take a little bit for there's some new faces. They kind of changed some stuff up. It's some youth there. I don't know. They could suck. If anything, I'm giving the 3 toughest series in those 12 to the next 2, Milwaukee and Minnesota, 2 central teams in different leagues that are probably towards the top of their respective divisions. But Milwaukee just traded Corbin Burns. We know that. So there's a chance they're kind of taking a step back, rebuilding a little. And Minnesota is one of those teams that you never can quite figure out if they're going to be decent, if they're going to stink. So there's a very good chance both those teams are kind of stinking, especially in April. Okay? Then you go back to Kansas City and the Angels. Again, 2 teams that we should be able to beat up on, because they're not going to be very good. There's not a ton of talent out there, especially to start the season, even if they're better than people expect. Oakland, who has historically the lowest win total Vegas has ever posted on a baseball team. That's how bad they're supposed to be this year. Now, I would take the over, frankly, just because if it's a historic under, odds are it will wind up sneaking over somehow. But they're going to go months where they barely get any wins, possibly. They might have a whole month where they don't win a game. Probably not. But they might be that bad. Weeks without a win. Then, the 3rd toughest series in that, 4 against New York, but they're at home. And, again, Garrett Cole won't be there for sure. So that's, at best, that's when he's coming back. And I think that he's going to need maybe some rehab games first when he comes back. So really that month would be a month and a half, let's say. And that 2 months would probably be more like 2.5 months. Cincinnati, who has some intrigue. I've been predicting a random World Series in the Orioles versus the Reds. And I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think the Orioles will get there, but the Reds is kind of just a shot in the dark for crazy odds, but it's intriguing, that matchup, and brings you back to the glory days of both these teams, back in like the 70s, that matchup. But again, as much as I think Cincinnati's going to be taking a step forward, still, they're not elite. They're not at the top. They're not at the Orioles level of teams. And then you got 2 against the Nationals. So when you look at that stretch of the first 12 series, okay, 36 games, I don't think I'm crazy for saying that the Orioles could go 24-12. Now, by win percentage, that's 66%. That's high as far as a whole season goes, right? Last year, the Orioles won 101, and their win total was their win percentage was like 62-ish, give or take. So, yeah, 66 is high to start the season, but it's not insane. It's not historic. I mean, against those teams, you should have a couple sweeps in there. You shouldn't be getting swept by any of them. And so you average 1 loss in all of those series to start the year, 24-12. Is it a guarantee? No. But it's also not outrageous. They could wind up going 30-6. Truly. So I think I'm being conservative in that stretch when I go 24-12, right? So now I'm going to fast forward through 99 games after that and take you to the final 27 games. 9 series, the last 9 series of the year. because it ends almost just as easy as it starts for these Orioles. Once you get towards September, okay, at the back half of August, the last series in August into September, you have the Rockies, the White Sox, who is another team projected to be one of the worst teams in the league. Both of them, truly. The Rockies are just almost as bad as the A's. And the White Sox aren't far off. Tampa, who, listen, is Tampa. Okay. Boston, who, we'll see. We'll see if they're competing for that wild card like I think they could be. Or they could be battling not to lose 100 games by that point. Detroit, talk about garbage. And everyone's high on Detroit this year. People are buying Detroit stock. I see that a lot. They're to me a team that people are weirdly high on. I'm actually the other way. While I don't think this bet's going to pay out, I have a bet right now that the Tigers are going to have the worst record in baseball. So, good numbers. Because again, I think they're overvalued. That people are holding too much stock in these Tigers. I think they're just very, very average, if at best, honestly. So Detroit, San Francisco, who could go either way. People just like Detroit are buying San Francisco stock. I don't see it. I don't see them competing to that level. Maybe they don't lose 100 games type thing. But at best, they're like a 500 team also, I think. Then you got Detroit again. The Yankees in the second to last series. And then the Twins, who we talked about, could be decent this year. Could be close to a 90-win team by then. Could also be close to a 90-loss team, truly. The Twins could have the makings of a team that could have it all fall out from under it, or could be weirdly competitive. And I think they're going to be more weirdly competitive. But again, sitting at about 90 wins, if you're going to those last 3 games and they're sitting at about 90 wins, I have to believe that we're sitting higher. I believe that we're sitting at least at 93 wins, 95 wins. And I don't see the Twins at 90 wins there. I don't. So that's the back part of the schedule, right? I said 27 games. So if they go 17-10 in those final 27 games, okay, 9 series, so 10 losses in those 9 series, again, against a lot of garbage of the MLB, especially teams that might not have anything to play for anymore. You're at the end of September, end of September. These teams are ready for vacations, right? These teams are ready for the season to be done. It's been a long, tough season on them, and they're just ready to die. And the Orioles are ascending into the playoffs. They could steamroll a lot of these teams. So 17-10 is not outrageous. In fact, by win percentage, that's the 62% right at where they were with 101 wins, okay? So I take those first 36 games, we go 24-12. I take those last 27 games, we go 17-10. That leaves you with 99 games in the middle of the season. What if I were to tell you if those first 36 games go that way and the last 27 games go that way? In the middle 99, the Orioles could go 50-49, 1 game over 500 in those 99 games, and finish with 91 wins. Folks, I've been sitting here telling everybody all offseason, especially since we got Corbin Burns, this Orioles team is no worse than a 90-win ball club. Well, when I break down the schedule and I do the math, right there, I'm going conservative in the easiest parts of their schedule. And I'm going extremely conservative in that middle 99 games. And it comes out to 91 wins, gang. So this is why the Orioles have a very good shot at having the best record in baseball. Because there's a serious chance that they don't go just 1 game over 500, those 99. What if they go 59-40? Right there, there's 100 wins. Okay? So if instead of 1 game over 500 in that stretch, they add 9 of those losses to the win column. Very realistic. Not crazy. Win percentage-wise, that wouldn't even be the 62%. Like, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so then What if the conservative ends, beginning and end, they do just slightly better? They do 26-10. And then they go 20-7 down the stretch. I just added what? 5 more wins? So now you're talking 105 win team. Do I think they're getting 105? Probably not. Probably not. But when you crunch these numbers, there's nothing standing in their way from getting easy 90 wins. The team is too talented not to win at least 90 games with the schedule they have in front of them. Okay? And if you want to talk about long stretches in the season, and I'll just be clear, I didn't look into every team's schedule. I don't know if this is pretty carte blanche for the whole league, this is pretty standard for the whole league, or if this is just how the Orioles schedule shakes out. I'm not sure. But you have one 10-day stretch of games. You have 4 13 straight day stretch games. And then you have one brutally tough 17 straight days there. However, you get 4 of those, including the 17, out of the way before July in the first half of the season. And then you only have 2 of the 13 straight days after the All-Star game. And almost directly after the All-Star game. Because none of that condensing is in September. Now, sure, odds are there will be some games that get delayed, get postponed, get suspended even, whatever it may be, and that can screw up the schedule slightly. That can give you an off day in the middle of those 17 straight games. But then that makes something else a 13 straight, whatever it may be. I know baseball works stuff in to make sure usually things can work out pretty fairly. But this is a pretty generous and nice schedule, okay? Really the hardest stretch, we go from a 13 straight days against some tough teams to 17 straight days against very tough teams to 13 straight days against pretty tough teams also, okay? That takes you from the middle of May to the end of June. That's the hardest stretch for these Orioles. You have Seattle, St. Louis, White Sox, and Boston for 13 straight days. Then immediately after, go to Tampa Bay, Toronto, Tampa Bay again, Atlanta, and Philly for 17 straight days. That's about as tough of a stretch as maybe any teams are going to have. But you have to think, we play Tampa and Toronto very tough. So, and Toronto and Tampa in that span are 4-game sets each. So we have 11 of those 17 games against teams we know really well and play really well. And then after that, you go right into 13 straight days again with the Yankees, the Astros, the Indians, and the Rangers. Indians are similar to me with the Twins, where, again, you don't know which way it's kind of going to shake out. They could be pretty decent. They could kind of stink. They could be right around 500. Texas, we know, are the reigning champs, and they had our number last year in the postseason. You don't think these Orioles are gonna be ready to roll right then? That want to get that revenge on them? And Texas, to me, smells of a World Series champ that gets forgotten about in like 4 to 5 years because they just kind of went back to average mediocrity after they got their ring. And good for them. They got their ring. I'm happy for them. Listen, I told, when I was at the ALDS Game 1, me and John were sitting next to 2 Rangers fans, a couple that were Rangers fans, and they were from down there and stuff. And they were nice people, and we talked to them, and we were nice. And after the game, we wished them luck and said, told them, if you wind up winning the series, I hope you go all the way. Well, they did. So good for them. They got their ring. We're looking for our ring. But so that's the toughest stretch of the season, gang. And I think the Orioles could come out with a winning record in those games. In those 43 games. It's not tough. It's not crazy. 43, we go 23-20. Again, I don't need you to dominate because, again, I just need you to go a game above 500 50 and 49 in that 99 game stretch in the middle, because I'm assuming you're going to start the season really well. And I'm assuming you're going to end the season pretty well. And then at that point, you just have to play 500 baseball, gang. So there's a lot to love about this schedule. And again, I didn't break down other teams' schedules. I don't know how hard they have it to start or finish. I don't know if they have the same amount of 13 straight days windows. I don't know if they have one 17 straight day window. I don't know if that's, I would assume that's something baseball tries to keep pretty fair and even and give every team. But who knows? We also don't have any of those international series games, which is a beautiful thing. Because starting next year, probably, get ready. Orioles are a team that they're going to want to promote a lot. That they're going to want to get on national TV. That they're going to want to send overseas. And frankly, the Orioles, to me, tend to be one of the teams in the past, before they started these regular season games overseas, would always do stuff, not always, but would be the team doing stuff internationally. I know they had the game in Cuba in like the early 2000s. I want to say they had a spring game out in Japan or something a year or two ago, maybe. I could be mistaken on that. I would have to relook it. I meant to, and I forgot. It's okay, because we've got a lot of information on our plate. Some things get lost in the weeds. But I feel as though they're a team that has kind of paved the pathway for these international series. And frankly, I'm very happy to not have to go play regular season games in different countries. Because, yeah, while the other team has to deal with it too, the other teams in the league don't necessarily have to deal with it. It's not apples to apples. And like the Dodgers and Padres are going to Seoul, Korea. Is that going to take a bit of a toll on your guys? Is that going to have them be a little foggy to start the season? I know they get back in time, but still, stuff like that I'd rather my team just not have to go through. And truthfully, I feel like in the future is coming very soon for us, because we're going to be one of these premium teams for baseball to promote and want to show overseas. So because of that, enjoy this season where we don't have it. We don't have to factor any of that into account. And the schedule shakes out great, guys. It really does. Even just going into the All-Star break, after the 13 straight and 17 straight and 13 straight, we got 4 series before the All-Star break. Seattle, who will be tough. Seattle is one of, if not our biggest competition for the AL pennant this year. You heard it here first from me. But then you have Oakland again. The Cubs, who I don't see the Cubs being very good. And the Yankees again. So you're going into that. And a lot of these home aways, again, baseball might do this for every team. Might be very even when it comes to this. But it's not the hardest thing as far as travel. It's not the craziest thing when, you have the away matching up with the home. Like, the travel makes sense in a lot of these instances, right? When you really break it down and really look at it. And heck, there's a lot of wins out here, guys. There's a lot of wins. There's 162 games staring me in front of the face. And truthfully, I think the Orioles win at least 100 of them. Again, I do. When you break down the math. Again, you're telling me you don't think that the Orioles are going to play 500 baseball through the middle of the season? At least one game over 500 baseball in the middle of that 99 games? Because I think they're probably having no long stretch where they're just a game above 500. They're going to be at least 4, 5, 6 games above 500. That just keeps ticking the wins, guys. Ticking the wins. And, this 91 wins is essentially right on Vegas's line. So that's kind of funny to me that I want to say maybe it's 92 and a half or something, but it might be 91 and a half. I know different places have different lines, but it was kind of funny when I saw that, because I don't think Vegas sat down and broke down the math the same way I did. But again, it doesn't take much to have a nice 24-12 start to the season. In fact, I think it's relatively conservative. with the teams we're facing. And it doesn't take much to go 17-10 in the last 9 series against, again, not very good teams who might be completely out of it. And if we don't do as well in those 2 stretches, yeah, we have to do a little better during that 99-game stretch. Luckily, I think we're going to do much better. I think we'll be a good chunk over 500 in that 99-game stretch, right? So that's kind of my schedule breakdown. It was something I really wanted to touch on because, 1, it's fascinating to me. 2, it's just exciting to kind of look forward at all of the games, all of the series coming our way. It's all right here on paper. And it's so exciting that we're less than 2 weeks away, gang. About 10 days, give or take. 11 maybe, something along those lines. Couldn't be any more excited for this opening day and just this season in general. I believe this is our year, Birdland. I really do. It's coming. And it's coming quick. And it's coming this year. It's because all of the talent and the roster that we have that we talk about each and every episode. But frankly, it's also maybe the generosity of the schedule that we got this year as well. Because this is a very generous schedule. And luckily, I don't think the Orioles are going to take any of this for granted. Because they're hungry this year. They're hungry after what happened against Texas. You know, not many young teams like this would come off of 101 wins and be starving and hungry and determined to do better. That's what these Orioles got because of their ass kicking that Texas gave us. But it was a learning lesson. And we're going to go far. We're going to go very far this year. And like I said, playoffs, I don't see how they're not a guarantee, gang. I don't want to put myself in that jinx possibility, but I don't see how it's not a guarantee that we make these playoffs. And potentially are the 1 seed in the AL again. Potentially have the best record in baseball this year. I love the idea. I love where they're sitting. I love where we're at. And I think that's going to do it for this episode, gang. We're going to wind it down. We're going to wrap it up. Personally, I'm a little hungover today. I didn't tell you that earlier, but I'm a little hungover. My stomach's killing me. I need some food in me. I need to get myself some sandwiches. And we did a lot of good stuff today. We talked a lot of good stuff. A lot of good Orioles baseball topics. And we're ramping up for the regular season, gang. It's going to be here. It's going to be here before we know it. So with that being said, Birdland, we're going to call this an episode. You have a great rest of your day. And let's go O's.